The firstborn, a phrase found many times in the Bible, but what does it mean? We're going to look at the sacrifice or consecration of the firstborn. So let's turn to Exodus 13, and let's begin by looking at verses 1 through 2. It says, "Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Consecrate to me all the firstborn, whatever opens the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and beast, it is mine." So I just want to stay there for a minute. I want to look at that phrase, "it is mine." What that says is that the firstborn belongs to God. Now, the firstborn is important in a number of different ways, and but I want to look at some of them today and kind of work our way through this. So the firstborn represents the first fruits. It represents the first of the next generation. It represents the first in sequence. Christ was the firstborn of God, and you say, well, how could that be? Well, it's his only begotten Son. That you don't start at 2, so we know first of God. But it tells us in this verse to consecrate, sacrifice, or set aside for use by God all of the firstborn, whether it's man or beast. That and the beast part of that phrase, that referred to our wealth. The labors, the efforts, the wealth, the business. It applied to all of those things. So it doesn't matter whether it was beast or man, firstborn, that's mine. We do a thing with children where we have baby dedications. We dedicate a child back to God, recognizing that they came from God. And, so there's while we do that with children, firstborn or not, it's recognizing that these things come from God. So in this verse, the consecration of the firstborn, there is a priorities matter thing that we need to look at. There's what is the priority? What's the priority in your life? What's the priority in how these things are done? And that's one of the things that we really want to pull from this. But again, I want to grab that phrase, "it is mine." In other words, God says, that's mine. The weight of first things. So what is that? Well, the weight of first things is the importance to God of first things. We tend in our heart, the thing that we do first, the thing that we think about first, the thing that we focus on first, those things, that's what's most important to us. Where your heart is, there your treasure will be. Right? What's important to you rises to the top. And if you look at children, as it's talking about in part here, if you look at that, your firstborn child, what you do and how you deal with your firstborn child speaks a lot about what your priorities are. How you raise them. You're raising them to be in church and to love God. And are you laying down an example of that? Are you teaching them proper manners and proper work ethic and all of those kinds of things? It tells you where, some of where your heart is. The consecration of the firstborn, this was a sacrifice. It was eaten by the priests or by their families. In other words, it belonged to God. And so the emphasis again is on this, "it is mine." It's on this idea of it belongs to God. And we're going to come back and talk about that a little bit more here in a few minutes. But it's just that it's very important for us to get that concept of it belongs to God, that it is mine. Now, the verse continues on, verse 3 continues on and says, And Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you went out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. For by strength of hand the Lord brought you out of this place. No leavened bread shall be eaten on this day you are going out, in the month Abib. And it shall be when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Levites and the Jebusites, which he swore to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, that you shall keep this service in this month. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day there shall be a feast of the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days. And this is talking about, obviously, the feast of unleavened bread. But again, it ties back to what we talked about last week, which is the Passover. And it also ties back to this idea of first fruits or first things or firstborn and keeping things right. And if we go down and look at Hebrews 13:16, I said go down and look at it. I actually got to go look it up. Sorry. If we go look at Hebrews 13:16, if I can actually get it to turn there. There we go. Hebrews 13:16. We can look about doing good. It says, Hebrews 13:16 says, but do not forget to do good and to share, for with such sacrifices God is well pleased. Doing good. Now, in looking at this sacrifice of the firstborn, the consecration of the firstborn, and doing good, let's go to Cain and Abel. That's all the way the other end of the Bible, back to Genesis. Cain and Abel. Cain slew Abel. Why? Because he was not happy with the sacrifices he brought. But let's look at the difference. The sacrifice of the animal versus the sacrifice of the crops or what have you. Both were sacrifices. One involved bloodshed, the other did not. And again, the blood sacrifice is what atones for our sin. And that's why one was acceptable and the other was really not. But I want you to also look at this idea of doing good. We need to do good. And when we consecrate first things, when we take the firstborn, when we take and consecrate that to God, make that sacrifice of consecration of first things, we're doing good. We're doing good, and and we're also trusting God. If you take a lamb out of your flock, and that's your wealth, okay, your flock is your wealth. You take a lamb out of your flock, it's the firstborn lamb, and you consecrate that, you sacrifice that to God. What you're saying in part is, God, I trust that there's more. I trust that you're going to take care of more than just this. I trust that there's a next generation. I trust that there's a next flow of wealth. I trust that there's next things that you have for me, God. Versus if I just take some of my crop and I sacrifice that, I can get more fruit. Even if I pick the tree, it can produce more fruit, etc. I don't have the same level of commitment. I don't have the same level of trust. Now, again, there's the blood sacrifice part of it. I'm not trying to diminish that. I'm just saying it's okay to trust in God. And that's part of what being able to consecrate first things is about, is the ability to trust God. I remember my parents always were concerned with consecrating things to God. And I remember they bought a Ford van, the 1969 Ford van, and custom ordered, and they consecrated that to God. And the idea behind it was, one, it could be used in the singing group ministry that they had to haul the equipment and the singing group in one vehicle, so you weren't in multiple cars, getting lost on your way to somewhere. It didn't always really work that way because when you loaded everything in, it just really still wasn't big enough. And later we went to buses, but that's a whole different story. But I remember they consecrated that 69 Ford van for that purpose. And they also used it. They were the youth pastors, and so they used that to haul kids to all kinds of things, to camp, to concerts, to just outings. They would pick up kids for youth service using that same van, and that was a great old van. It was also my first car. When they retired it from all of those things, it became my first car, and that van was just it was a blessing. It really was a good old rig, and again, they had consecrated it to God. And then when we got the buses, those were consecrated to God, and all these different things down the line. But they always wanted to set aside and say, God, this is yours. We give this to you. You've helped us get it. We want to give it to you. And that's part of this idea of, getting our priorities. What is your priority? Are you thinking about, wow, this is cool. I got a van. I can pull a boat. I can go camping. Or are you thinking, I can use this to help further the kingdom of God? What are you doing with what God brings to you? What are you doing with what God blesses you with? That's important to understand. And like I said, it's part of being able to trust God and put him first. Now, we've been tying this to the 7 deadly sins, which again are not found specifically in the Bible, but and tying them loosely together. I'm not trying to create a direct parallel here, but the 6th sin, if you will, is the sin of envy. The sin of envy. And envy is an intense desire to have an item that someone else possesses. An intense desire to have an item that someone else possesses. And we have to be very careful of allowing envy in our lives. And Proverbs 14:30 says, a sound heart is life to the body, but envy is rottenness to the bones. Envy is rottenness to the bones. Why? Because it eats at our very core. It eats at our very heart. It eats at our very center, because we want something that someone else has. Instead of being grateful for what we have, instead of being thankful for what we have, instead of being satisfied with what we have, instead of being gracious with what we have, instead of taking what we have and being able to consecrate it to God, we're busy worrying about what somebody else has. And we can try and tell ourselves that we're doing the right thing by saying, well, if I had that, I could do this for God. But it still doesn't change the fact that I have an intense desire to have an item that someone else possesses. Instead of being able to go to God and simply say, God, if you want me to have something like that, would you work it out? Would you make that happen? And I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on you. I'm going to focus on you, God. You take care of the things that I need. That's what his word says. In fact, the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, or I shall not have need. But it comes from recognizing that he's my shepherd, and I can trust in him. Kindness cures envy. Kindness cures envy. Kindness is a desire to help that is greater than the desire to surpass. I want to help someone do well more than I want to try and outdo them. Think about that in relationship to the intense desire to have an item that someone else possesses. I want to help them more than I want to surpass them in what they do or have. That's, we would call that being a team player, right? The ability to help someone else take a step up, to be a support for someone else in their goals and their walk. That's part of kindness. So when we look at the sin of envy, we look at first things first, we start kind of recognizing some of the places where these cross over. We need to recognize the source for all. The source for everything that we have is God. And if we recognize that, it sets us on a right path for being humble. It sets us on a right path for being right-hearted. It sets us on a right path for being thankful. It sets us on a right path for being kind. It sets us on a right path for being gracious. It sets us on a right path for sacrificing or consecrating those first things to God. And in talking about this, and talking about the firstborn being consecrated and that sacrifice, this is not the same as tithe. We'll talk about that soon enough. But this is not the same as tithe. You know, the tithe, we talk about bringing the first fruits to the storehouse and all of those things. But recognizing and consecrating the first is not the same as tithe. This is more than tithe. This is recognizing the source of what you have. Recognizing that it belongs to God. It is the idea of giving your best first. Remember when Jesus turned the water into wine, that was one of the things that they marveled at was, they generally, don't put the best out right away. And this is what we're saying here is, when I recognize that it's God's anyway, I can give my best first. It came from God, belongs to God. I can do that first. I can do the best thing first. And in my job, my current job, my first boss in this particular job had a philosophy and a phrase that he used all the time, and I really adapted and grabbed a hold of it. I love it. He said, "Good enough never is." And that idea of good enough never is really actually came from some, I think it was Max Lucado. There was some teaching that he had heard from Max Lucado, and it really affected his life. But it all ties to this idea of consecration of the firstborn. It's putting the best first. It's doing the best you can. It's an attitude of doing the best. And good enough never is. That phrase, good enough never is not designed to be negative. It's not a phrase that's supposed to make you think, well, no matter what I do, it's never good enough. That's not it. It's the idea that you strive to do your best. You strive to give your best. You strive to put your best out first. You strive to do all of those things because the attitude of, well, that's good enough, never is good enough. That attitude that, well, I'll just do the minimum, doesn't fly. That attitude doesn't work. And if we take our walk with Christ, and we're doing this whole series, Tending the Altar. And we've talked about in tending the altar that it's to pay attention to or apply oneself to or act as an attendant or serve as part of that. That it's a responsibility. There are those who are charged with that responsibility to tend the altar. And that the priests of the Old Testament who were tending the altars had three main functions: to assist in accessing God, and to teach, and to seek out the will of God on a large or corporate scale. And if you look at that in context of good enough never is, or putting first things first, or the consecration of the firstborn, if you tie those concepts together, the process of tending the altar and that idea of consecration of things and giving your best, and good enough never is good enough, if you look at those together and assist in accessing God, one of the three main functions there, assist in accessing God. Well, how should we go about that? Shouldn't we live a life that puts our firstborn, puts our first things in consecration, in service to God? That idea of putting our best out there first, and the idea of giving our best back to God because it's His anyway. Wouldn't that assist in accessing God? Wouldn't that be doing our best to help people see that? Wouldn't it be living our life so that we're a living example of that? If one of our main functions is to teach, wouldn't teaching the idea that we need to put God first be the right thing to do? Wouldn't teaching the idea that good enough never is be the right way to teach it? Wouldn't it be the right thing to do to teach that we need to consecrate those first things to God? Wouldn't that be the right way to go about it? Wouldn't that be the right direction to go? And then, the idea of seeking out the will of God on a large corporate scale, or like the direction of the nation, the direction of the church, the direction of the family, those kinds of things. Don't we want to put God first? Don't we want to have the idea that we're going to do our best for God? The idea that we're going to consecrate the firstborn because it belongs to God in the first place. That's a lifestyle change. That's a change in every aspect of your life, in recognizing that I need to put God first. I struggle sometimes, and I admit this to you, I struggle sometimes when I watch and I see all the excuses people have for not putting God first. I want to see God move. I want to see this happen. I want to do this. I want to do this. I want this to happen, blah, 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 bless me, etc. But any little excuse will do for why I can't do something for God. Is your life dedicated to God? Well, no, I'm just in it for the fire insurance. I gave my life to Him. I'm going to heaven. That's good enough. Good enough never is. Am I saying you're not going to heaven? I'm not saying that. I'm saying that if you want to have a life that is one that is pleasing to God, one that is blessed of God, the first thing we need to do is give Him those firstborn, those first fruits. We need to give to God what is His. We need to recognize that it's His. That's important. It's like the farmer not recognizing the seed, to not recognize that the first belongs to God. It's silly. It's foolish. I don't need seed. I just have crops. Well, not without having seed first. You don't. And so, am I going to put God first? Am I going to give Him the best? Am I going to consecrate the first things that He blesses me with to Him? Am I going to put those things back in service to Him? Am I going to have an attitude and live out my life with the idea that good enough never is? I need to be the best for God that I can be. I need to give God my best, my first, my strength, my prime, my time, my talents. They all come from God. Am I going to put those things first? Are first things going to be first with God, or are they going to be first with self? Or are they going to be first with the world? Where are my first things going? And that's really what I'm trying to challenge you with today, is the idea of where do the first things go? What is their priority? Am I prioritizing first things to what's first in my life, to God? Or is God not first? Gail Sayers wrote the book, I Am Third. God is first, my friends and family are second, and I am third. How are my priorities lined up? Is God first? Does he get my best time? Does he get my best talent? Does he get my best money? Does he get my best things that he's blessed me with? Because they're his already. And if you think about that, your best time, it says that the first things belong to him. Your first time belongs to him. If you want to see your time magnified, give him the first part of it. Give him the best part of it. Consecrate the best part to God. The weight of things is what matters to you given to God. Do you take the things that truly matter to you and give them to God? Or is what really matters to you the things that you keep away from God? That's my time. That's my private interest. That's where I get some rest. That's where I have fun. That's where and you've got all of these separate things out here that you're not giving to God. In fact, you're drawing a line and excluding God from those things, because somehow in your mind, giving those to God is the same as wasting them and not doing what's right with them. No. Good enough never is. Give God your playtime. In other words, recognize God. Put him first in all of the things that you do. And then watch what happens when he blesses those and magnifies those. Because you know what? They were his in the first place. Recognize that they come from God. Give those things to God. So as we look at this and kind of wrap it up, first things first. Put God first in all things. Recognize God first in all things. Adapt the attitude that good enough never is. Adapt the attitude that I'm going to give God my best. I'm going to give God my first. Put God first in all that you do, and he will bless you. He will make your path straight. But it's not something you do with that in mind that, I need to get the blessing out of this thing. I just want to be of use to God. Put him first in all that you do. I would challenge you to do that this week. I would challenge you to do that going forward. And just remember, we want to give God our best. And good enough never is. So put God first. And that's it for this week.